Welcome to the Living After Faith podcast, a podcast designed to help you as you make your exit from religion and move forward with your life. We're the official podcast of RecoveringReligionist.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. We welcome your feedback, and you can contact us by going to livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith, and follow us on Twitter at Laugh With Me, that's LAF with me. And now, today's program on Living After Faith. I'm Rich Lyons.
And I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
And today we have a special guest, Deanna.
Today we're talking to Candace Gorham. She lives in North Carolina, and she is not only someone who has escaped from religion herself, but she's also gathering information and interviews for her own project, a book about Black women who have left religion, and it may expand to other women who've left religion, if that's correct, right, Candace?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Sounds like it's going to be a wonderful project, and it dovetails really nicely with what we're doing, which is why we wanted to ask you about your experience, which is why we're all here today. So could you tell us how things started out? Were you involved in church as a child? Did you have heavy indoctrination?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. When my parents were together, my dad was a Jehovah's Witness, and my mom just kind of went along with it. And then my mom and my dad separated when I was about 9. And I continued to study, though. I think they call it like a home study. So a family would come and see me at home. And I have an older brother and a sister. But this family would come see me at home, and, you know, I would read the Bible stories and read the Watchtower and all of that stuff with them. That whole experience with going through the Jehovah's Witness stuff was the thing that I remember as being the most traumatic out of that was, I remember, I couldn't have been no more than 5 years old. And they have this yellow book. I think it's called, I can't even remember what it's called, but it's the same book. They've been using it for 100 years, and all of the kids get free copies of it. And it basically has little summaries of the most popular Bible stories, kind of, illustrated for children and stuff. There was this one section when it gets to the crucifixion of Jesus. And the picture was literally this bloody Jesus hanging on the cross. And I mean, it's really disgusting. And I remember I broke down crying in the hallway. I was sitting on the floor in the hallway of our apartment. And I just cried and cried and cried. And I remember I took markers and I just wrote all over the page, "I love you, Jesus. I love you, Jesus." Aww. And I remember that, my whole life. And I just remember this sense of like Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe in hell. But they're they really guilt you into following, their precepts and stuff, because it's always this message of God loves you so much. And if you don't love him back, look at what you're doing. You're just completely throwing away this entity that loves you so much. So there was a lot of guilt around that. And I remember, when I was really little, like I said, just the slightest little thing would just make me feel so guilty. One time I took a red pen from my best friend's house, and I just remember I felt so guilty about that for years, about that little red pen.
Which is like nothing. That's a minor, I wouldn't even call that a misdeed. I would call that like a little naughty. I know how that is, those feelings when you're a child, so huge, so magnified.
So I kind of fell out of church for a few years when I got into middle school. But about 7th into 8th grade, I started going to church with my aunt and some cousins to kind of what you might call the family church on my dad's side of the family, which was this United Methodist church. And basically everybody in our family, goes there, gets married there, that kind of thing, gets buried in the graveyard, all of that. And but it was really a non-traditional United Methodist church. It was very different in that there would be shouting and singing and, laying on hands and that kind of stuff, which is kind of atypical for Methodist, United Methodist.
Yeah, the one I went to, they didn't do anything interesting.
Right. No, this church, the choir would sing, it wasn't just hymns, it was Kirk Franklin and that kind of stuff. So I went there for several years, and that aunt that I was with kind of became like a second mom to me. So, of course, everything she said was it was law to me. And I remember one time she talked about how sometimes people are so deep in their sin that you have to literally scare the hell out of them. And what she meant was you have to teach them, about hell, and you have to teach them just how horrible this place is and how tormented you'll be. And I remember at that time thinking like, yeah, you're right. But at the same time, being terrified by that thought at the same time.
Yeah. And having started out with no concept of hell to go into a situation where you have the hell scared out of you.
Exactly.
Or have that talked about. That must have been a major point of doubt to go, well, those people didn't believe in hell and these people really believe in hell. That must have been a little confusing.
Yeah, there was always this kind of back and forth because, even when I was younger, like I said, my dad was a Jehovah's Witness, but nobody else in our family was. And so our family was kind of shunned a little bit, for being Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember one time being at my grandmother's house and a bunch of my uncles were sitting around. And I remember overhearing them talking about something called hellhounds. And they were talking about how these things could literally come out of hell and could come and torment people and actually drag them back to hell if they wanted to.
Wow.
And they were not trying to scare children. There were no children around. I just was kind of eavesdropping,
Right.
And I kid you not, I don't know how old I was when that happened. I was in elementary school. I was really young. And I'm 30 today, and I can honestly say that until a few years ago, when I finally started coming out of religion, I would still have nightmares about hellhounds. I'm talking in my mid-20s. I would wake up in the middle of the night and be sure that there was a hellhound in the corner of my bedroom.
Oh, you poor baby. Those things just stick with you.
And then when I got to, I guess, my senior year in high school, about 18, my sister married a pastor. And this pastor ended up being the most extreme out of any experience. Well, no, I'm sorry. He wasn't the most extreme. He was the second most extreme. But he taught about praying in tongues and laying on hands and fasting, and everything had a demon on it, and you had to cast the demon out of everything. And I actually ended up being ordained in his church. I was ordained as an evangelist and a prophetess in his church. And our church joined something called the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, something like that, which is a pretty big movement within the Black community.
Like a chain of churches that all kind of have membership in an organization?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm kind of learning that. I shouldn't call it a chain. That makes it sound like...
Denomination might be better.
Denomination. Yeah, that makes it sound like McDonald's. I'm like, you can get the same cheeseburger at that church as you can in that church.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So what does a prophetess and evangelist do? That sounds very interesting.
Well, as an evangelist, of course, I was responsible for going out on the streets and knocking on doors and praying for people in their homes and basically trying to recruit people to come to the church. We were actually a really small ministry. And so there was a lot of pressure on me to, you need to be the one out there, trying to get people in church. And I'm talking, I was like 21 years old. And there was a lot of pressure, on me to be out there, do this. We need to build our church membership. But of course, there was always the side message of, there are hurting people out there and we need to be teaching them about the love of Christ and all of this. But at the same time saying we need members because we got to pay this, we got to pay the rent this month on this, on this church building. And the pastor didn't work. Now, this is my sister's husband now.
Right.
He didn't work. He absolutely refused to work. He insisted that he was going to live according to the Bible, which said that, the minister shouldn't have to work, that the people should take care of the ministers. So there was a lot of pressure on me as the evangelist to be out there, and I'm, middle of the summertime, middle of the winter, it didn't matter.
Was it just you as the main evangelist, or did you have anybody else to help recruit?
I never went out alone. So there was always somebody, but I was I was kind of the common denominator. So sometimes the pastor would go with me. Sometimes one of my cousins would go with me. Sometimes we actually got married really young. I got married at 20, so I'm getting ready to celebrate 10 years. And will you believe that I got married because a man prophesied that we were supposed to be married?
Oh, wow.
And our crazy tails got married at 20. I always tell people, I would not advocate it. Don't do it. We are the exception to the rule that we have survived 10 years, getting married so young. I guess as far as being a prophetess, I was expected to fast and pray and spend a certain amount of time of prayer in prayer a day, so that on Sundays and Wednesdays and Fridays and choir rehearsals on Saturdays or whatever, so that I would be prepared to have a word. If somebody needed to be prayed for, or I was expected to kind of be there beside the pastor, praying for people and offering prophecies and stuff. And oh man, I thought I was prophesying too. I would have dreams and I would have all kinds of, moments where I was sure that I had given somebody a prophecy. And, I had a couple of things that just happened to be true. And so of course you forget about the 1,000 other prophecies that were just foolishness.
Right.
So there was that aspect too of, it was a lot of pressure, just being in my early 20s to have that kind of weight and responsibility on me. I mean, I was responsible for casting out demons. I remember one time my pastor called and was like, oh, sister so-and-so, she called me and said that she was having this nightmare. I need you to go over there and cast that devil out of her. Of course, I got to get prayed up before I go over there. And I thought I had this vision of what was going on with her. And I went over there and I prophesied to her and I kind of told her what God was showing me. And she cried and I prayed and she fell out on the floor and she was spitting and hot. And it was just, now, of course, now that I've come out of that and I'm researching all of this stuff, obviously, I think it's just foolishness. And I kind of look at that stuff and just laugh and think, I can't believe that I did that kind of stupid shit at 20, 21, 22.
Well, of course, we know now that it's not stupid if everybody around you is doing a certain thing or expecting a certain thing or saying a certain thing, that to go along with it is human. Rich, would you tell the story about how the different churches that you preached at, they did different things while they were worshiping this? This is a prime example.
I traveled evangelistically, and I began to notice several things. There were some things that were pretty universal from church to church, and there were some things that were just off the wall crazy from different churches. Like, for instance, one day I am preaching and just preaching my heart out, and all of a sudden people start running out the door. I'm thinking, what is going on? And I wait and people start showing back up. So at least they hadn't, driven off or something. So I finished my message. And afterwards I asked the pastor, I said, what was that all about? And he said, oh, that's just when they really get in the spirit, everybody runs around the mailbox and comes back in. I'm like, where did that get started? And he said, well, a certain brother got his healing when he ran around the mailbox. So from that point on, that's just become, so I'm like, wow.
You sure that wasn't at my church?
It might have been. I don't know. But it's just so unusual that, or maybe it's typical, that each church has its own personality, and it's like God talks differently to each one, He doesn't talk to that one. I mean, at my church in East Texas, nobody would ever thought of running around the mailbox. I mean, that wasn't on our radar scope. Another thing I noticed is when you're doing the whole casting out a devil thing, and yeah, I did that too. When you're doing that, the people that you're casting the devil out of always respond the way they think a devil is supposed to respond. Some people, when they're done, they just smile and they're happy and everything's good. Others think they have to puke something up, and, yes, those are the nasty ones. But yes, it's just amazing that the people respond in the way that they think they're supposed to, which I think tells a whole lot about religion overall. People respond the way they think they're supposed to.
So you better hope they didn't see The Exorcist, or they'd be trying to puke up green pea soup.
Yeah, green stuff.
You're laughing, but we literally kept like grocery store plastic trash bags on the pulpit because when it was time to cast out a devil, everybody that we were praying for would get a bag. And we would be like, just cough, cough, you know, when you start feeling it, you know, because the devil, when that spirit comes out, it's going to try to choke you. So you need to be coughing to get it out.
Wow.
And I mean, obviously, if you cough and hack for 10 minutes, you're probably going to throw up something.
This just makes me go, boom, like my brain explodes. I go, because, you know, the churches I went to as a kid didn't have things like this happening. But, you know, I wonder, though, if I'd seen those things, would I have ended up all, you know, sucked into it? Because it was, the churches I was in were always boring. And, you know, knowledge and science and common sense and all the other things that were telling me that, you know, these beliefs couldn't be true. Like, with the emotional,
you'd have called bullshit on that. Maybe. You would have called bullshit on that.
Maybe, but you know, the emotional pull of things like, you know, seeing demons cast out. That, I wonder if that would have got me. Anywho.
Well, Candace, tell us, how did you go from casting out demons, fasting, praying every day, obviously dedicated to religion, out knocking doors? How did you leave all of that wonderful life behind?
Well, I think, as a lot of people say, it's kind of gradual. My sister and her husband moved to California, so we went to another church, which was just as crazy, but they didn't quite do quite as much of casting out devils and stuff like that. So that was a whole different kind of crazy. It was a mega church, and there was a lot of money talk and stuff. But I remember being in that church, and my husband and I mean, like I said, we got married at 20. And from the time we were 20 until a few years ago, we paid 10% of our money on absolutely everything. If we didn't have a church to go to, we would go online and pay 10% to somebody's ministry. I mean, we were in college, obviously, you know, in our early 20s, we would tithe on our refund checks, our student loans and stuff. We would tithe on that stuff. So, like I said, we were in this mega church, and I mean, we were just dedicated. You know, my husband is a musician. He played. I sing. We were at every service. We were involved, and we were really broke. And we couldn't understand why. We had just bought a house, and my husband lost his job like 6 months after buying that house. And, you know, obviously we can't understand, like, why are we tithing, but yet, you know, my car got repossessed. The other car broke down. My house is about to foreclose. You know, we had a little baby. My baby, you know, I'm going to the food bank to get bread. You know, it was just this really, really dark time. And I've always been a really depressed person. I mean, I've always struggled with depression. And in this particular church, we were constantly getting messages like, if you were depressed, you weren't praying enough. If you were not, and the pastor would literally say this. Now, of course, you know, he's the pastor of a mega church. His wife drove a BMW. He drove a Cadillac Escalade. They lived in a mansion. And he would literally say, if you're not living like I live, you're doing something wrong. So, of course, you know, when all this horrible stuff starts happening to us, we're like, oh, God, what are we doing wrong? And my husband and I, we're just fasting and we're praying and we're just reading our Bibles like crazy. And we couldn't find any answers. So I remember we both just got so disillusioned. We kind of, church attendance started to drop. And I remember one day just thinking, you know, my husband kind of did this in-depth study about tithing, and he went back and read all the Old Testament scriptures and all the New Testament scriptures and stuff. So he came to the conclusion that we didn't need to be tithing anymore. And so then I remember, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to do my own study about hell, because at that time I knew that a big part of my problem was I was just really afraid that I was going to die and go to hell. Despite the fact that I was trying really, really hard to serve God. And so I started this in-depth study. And I mean, I'm talking, I went back to the Greek. I went back to the Hebrew. I'm looking up everywhere. I'm looking up everything. I had my Strong's Concordance. I'm looking up every reference to hell in the Bible. And of course, I started to realize, you know, that the way that we were using hell was not the way that it was, you know, the way that it was in the Old Testament and even most of the New Testament until you get to like Revelations. You know, when I started studying that, I thought, wow, well, if people are wrong about this, what else are people wrong about? And I slowly just kind of started studying different things till I got to the point where I decided, you know what? Okay, churches got it wrong. They're full of shit. You know what? I believe in God. I believe in Jesus, but I no longer believe that I have to, you know, struggle in the ways that I had been taught. Well, and then it's kind of funny because I was watching, I finally saw Zeitgeist. I don't know, you guys know that video?
We haven't seen it yet, but we've, of course, heard a lot about it.
Oh, you got to see it. The first part, now, the second part of it is a bunch of conspiracy theory. But the first part of it, the first part of it was really like breaking down Christianity. And they started saying all this stuff that I had never heard about, how Jesus, you know, is really the same as 1,000 other gods that came before him, and, you know, saying all this stuff about how the Bible was created. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a lie. Like, who is lying on my sweet baby Jesus like this? And so, of course, I started doing my own research. And now when I do some research, So I went and checked out a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead to see, like, is this story about Horus? Is this true? Osiris and Horus. And sure enough, there it is, plain as day. So at that point, I started saying, well, if the Bible is wrong about this, because I was one of the literal, perfect word of God believers. Right. And so I started saying, well, if it's wrong about this, then what parts can I trust? And that's where it really started to fall apart at that point, when I realized there are, you know, if I can't trust this verse, then how do I know which ones I can trust? And then, like I said, just kind of my own research showing that, you know, I mean, goodness, once I started reading like Bart Ehrman talking about how the Bible came to be and how there was just so much conflict and so much drama, and, you know, how we get to our King James version today. At that point, I was done. I mean, I kind of did the whole agnostic thing for a little while because, as most people say, agnostic just seemed like a nicer word. At some point, I just got to the place where, again, you know, kind of I got into the Dawkins and the Hitchens and the, you know, Sam Harris, and reading about all, you know, like I said, Bart Ehrman, and reading all of these things. And I remember YouTube was my favorite for about a year. I was just watching religious debates for like nonstop for like a year. And at some point I came to the conclusion that, you know what, if there's not enough evidence that there's a God, and if there is a God, obviously he doesn't care enough to show himself to me. So, you know what, I might as well live my life as if there is no God. So that's basically it. And I just kind of came to, but I call myself everything. I mean, I call myself atheist, agnostic, humanist, secularist, skeptic. You know, I apply all of those words to me because they all fit me.
That is amazing. That sounds a lot like other stories we've heard, that people start to have doubts. They start to wonder things. They have questions, and the more research they do, the less that anything can be the literal 100% all the way truth of, you know, of Christianity, or, you know, whichever religion they are. Now, I was going to ask, I was curious, is your husband in the same place as you are on the journey? Is he still religious, or have you guys moved through things together? Yeah,
actually, we pretty much have progressed at the same time. As I was starting to get the most frustrated with church, because I was really in a really deep depression episode at that time, and I wasn't seeing a counselor because, again, I was getting all these messages that it was really my fault if I was depressed because I wasn't praying enough. So I was really disillusioned, I think, just slightly before he was. And we kind of had some conflict about, you know, he was like, you need to go to church. That's why you're depressed. But then, like I said, he kind of he got started to get disillusioned too. And so we have kind of progressed along together. And I think he got to the point where I kind of looked up these words. I found this word called an apathist. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
I like that.
Yeah, and basically it's, you know what? I really could give two rats ass about it. Like I don't care if there's a God, and I'm completely apathetic about it. And that's basically where he is today. So basically everything that he knows and that it's just all comes from me just talking and researching and showing him stuff. And, you know, he's interested in it when I'm interested in it, but he would never go out and buy a book on religion. I mean, he really does not care at this point. So luckily we did progress through that together. Cause I think that, you know, our marriage, I mean, it certainly wouldn't have withstood that test had he decided that he was going to remain in it.
Yeah, that can be very rough. And, you know, if he were, you know, like still super involved in the church and you know, a biblical literalist and all of that, it, you know, would have been probably more difficult than anything to remain married to somebody who goes, no, this is all BS. Right. I would just about rather him cheat on me than for him to have been one of those. Like, I think we could work through infidelity easier than we could have worked through that kind of a difference. I mean, a major difference in what you believe is true or not true about the world. That's a hard conflict to get over. I mean, if I tell Rich the sky is green and he looks at me and says, hell no, the sky is blue. I mean, there's not a real good way to get past something that would be such a major divide.
Right.
But you know, if I say the sky is aqua and he says the sky is robin's egg, we can deal with that a little better.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me about kind of where you're at today. How does life treat you without having to go to church and give prophecies and cast out demons?
And carry the little trash bags.
Well, I mean, I think, like you say, I mean, the story is very similar between a lot of people who come out. The sense of relief that I don't have to be scared of every little shadow. You know, this sense of relief that I don't have to, you know, I can't move without getting a word and a confirmation from somebody or something. I mean, it's just so much stuff that you couldn't do that I've always wanted to do, that I've always liked. You know, I love scary movies, but I went through years of not watching scary movies because a demon was going to jump out of the TV and get on me, and then I was gonna some kind of curse would befall me.
And I want to jump in here if I can. There are probably some people who are listening who are thinking that's a little overboard. That's not. What she's telling you is mainstream Pentecostalism. What she is telling you, she mentioned Foursquare, Full Gospel. What she's telling you is mainstream. So you may have come from a less abusive type of religious background than she and I did. But what Candace is telling you, I can vouch for. Everything she said, I've seen.
The demon coming out of the TV?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That's why we preached against television. That's why I didn't have a television for 20 years.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, what it kind of sounds like when I was a kid, I would hear that you shouldn't play with Ouija boards because you would invite a demon in. So I guess like watching a movie about scary, evil things might be similar because you're thinking about the evil demony things, so they can jump in and get you because you're vulnerable because you're thinking about them.
No, even the 6 o'clock news.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, a demon could come from anywhere, and that's what made the world so scary. Was, you know, like I said, it's not like a little green monster's gonna physically climb out, but you don't know where one is gonna transfer onto you. I mean, you had to be careful which people you hung around or who you touched in the grocery store or bumped into by accident. Like you know, I was taught that beauticians had to be careful because doing hair all day, like touching people's hair all day, they could pick up demons. Like Rich is saying, this was normal for the people. And I'm talking multiple churches that I would preach at and visit. And I mean, all up and down the East Coast, this was normal. You know, especially in the black church, like, yeah, demons are real and they torment people. And it was just terrible. I mean, it was terrible. And even my coming out of faith was so painful. I mean, I was terrified when I started studying hell. And when I started thinking, just so much as the thought that something in the Bible was wrong was a sin. And if I was wrong about this thing, I was going to be in hell. And that was terrifying. I mean, I was so scared just studying that stuff. But I couldn't give up. You know, I just couldn't stop. I thought, I've got to get to the bottom of this. And if this is shit, I want to know.
It took a hell of a lot of courage for you to buck those teachings and those beliefs and study it out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seriously impressed. Candace, you are a rock star, baby.
Well, thank you. It didn't feel like that, though. It certainly didn't feel like that, you know, coming out of it.
It felt like hell.
Yeah. You know, in my conversation with Deanna, I know you guys touch on sexual issues a lot. And kind of like what I don't know if you heard it, Rich, earlier when I was telling Deanna, I remember I had to be in about 5th or 6th grade. And I remember, I mean, that's pretty old, right? I mean, for what I'm about to tell you. I was in about the 5th grade, and I remember thinking that I could masturbate under the blanket and God wouldn't see it, so therefore it wouldn't be a sin. Like, I wouldn't get in trouble for that. And I'm thinking, now that I'm, you know, as old as I am, I'm thinking, I was like 12 years old. Like, how did my mind think such a stupid ass thing that under the blanket? You know what I'm saying? That it was just so crazy. It's all the cognitive dissonance that I talk about a lot. But I remember, you know, as I got older and kind of, you know, started having my first sexual encounters, and even up until a few years ago, again, until I started to come out of this, I had such sexual hangups that I would get physically ill after I had sex with somebody. I mean, I would physically have to like just lay there, and because I was sick and I needed a few minutes for the nausea to pass, because I had just sinned and I knew it and it was wrong. And oh my God, I hope I don't walk out of this, you know, place and get hit by a car. And even after being married, I would still experience that sometimes. Like, even though I knew it wasn't wrong, but sometimes I would still experience that sort of nausea that I knew was connected to guilt that I felt, you know, as a teenager.
How are you dealing with that now?
Nowadays, I mean, it's pretty cool. And I think, you know, my husband and I, but both of us are kind of becoming a little more, you know, adventurous, a little more open to, you know, bringing some, you know, mixing things up a little bit.
Excellent.
But, you know, I mean, definitely coming out made a big difference, because there were some things that I just would not do. And it was like, no, don't touch me there. Don't do this. Don't turn that TV to that channel. You know what I'm saying? We were very like, you know, very by the book, so to speak. And so, you know, now, of course, coming out of that, it's more adventurous and more, you know, so it's been definitely much better now than it was then. And I remember being taught, like, the pastor that I told you where I was ordained in that ministry, he would teach that, the best orgasm that you could have is if you were having sex and then start praying in tongues. And then that would be the best orgasm.
You know, I had a girlfriend and this was while I was still trying to hang on to Christianity, that when she would have an orgasm, she would scream at the top of her lungs, "Forgive me, Jesus." Oh. And in all honesty, that was the biggest boner killer ever.
Oh my! Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Sounds like it was very difficult to like flip the switch, because like before you're married, you know, you are not allowed to do anything, and you know it's all sin and it's so bad and it's like drilled into you, and then you get married and you're supposed to just flip that switch, like, okay, everything's good now. You're in the clear. You got the hall pass from God to have sex. But, you know, like you said, getting past that guilt and the nausea is, you know, you can't just come right out of it.
Right. And you said something earlier about the kind of double standard for women, that you can't be too sexy, but you got to be sexy enough. And that was even true being married. It was like, you know, well, I wasn't married at this point, but I remember going to a church, and I was in college, and this old lady brought a little sheet over to hang on top, put on top of my legs because they felt my skirt was too short. And I remember that hurt my feelings so bad. Yeah. And when I got married, it was the same kind of thing. Like, you can't come to church looking this sort of way, but then the pastor would simultaneously be preaching like, you know, women, you need to make sure you're doing whatever you need to do to satisfy your man. Yeah, but then at the same time, it was like, oh, but pornography is wrong, so don't do that, but do whatever you got to do to satisfy. You know what I'm saying? It was like all these conflicting messages, and it caused just way more drama than the orgasm was even worth.
Yeah.
Wow. trying to deal with all of that stuff.
Oh, wow. It causes way more drama than the orgasm was even worth.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, I love my husband, you know, and like I said, I've always enjoyed sex. And you know, we just definitely enjoy it more now, but there was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of going to the pastor at the church to say, oh, we're going through this. You know, it was there was absolutely no privacy in that church.
Did you have to ask, okay, he wants me to do this, and I don't think that we should because I don't think it's right. What does the Bible say? Did you have to go ask specific questions like that?
To be honest with you, I think that the pastor at that time would have wanted me to, but I was just way too embarrassed to even say that this was an issue that was going on in my marriage. I was just too embarrassed. It was like, you know, he already has taught the message. Pornography is wrong. There's nothing else to talk. You know, there's nothing else to say.
I had one pastor teach that you could learn everything you need to know about sex by watching horses. I am not making this up. He said, if horses don't do it, people shouldn't do it.
Oh, man.
He said,
I'd be sitting outside that field forever going, come on, boy horse, go down, baby, go down.
Right. I mean, how miserable would that be for the woman, especially? Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Well, at least horses don't do missionary, so.
Right.
You know, all the horse does is mount and pump a couple times and it's done, right? That's sad.
Yeah, it was. And I remember thinking, the confusion in my mind was simply, how on earth did he come up with that? As where on the planet did that concept even come from? Mm-hmm. Watch horses.
I think it turned him on.
Oh, maybe. Hey.
Wow. Well, Candace, this has been an absolute blast talking with you and learning about your story coming out. And I will say it again, took a hell of a lot of courage for you and your husband to do what you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I've had a wonderful time, and I look forward to hearing other people's reactions to this story, because you are an amazing woman, and you have a strength and a smarts and a courage that it flabbergasts me.
Right. Thank you.
I also want to say that Candace interviewed Deanna about her project earlier, and we recorded that, and I really would like to publish that as an extra podcast.
You have my permission if it's all right.
Is that okay, Candace?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. After this podcast, we're going to do a bonus edition. It's going to be longer. It'll be about an hour. And it's going to be Deanna and Candace just totally uncovered, and you guys are going to love it. It's going to be an awesome podcast. I heard enough of it from the hallway. Mm-hmm. The studio's kind of small, but I heard enough of it from the hallway to tell you this one is going to rock the planet. So I'm looking forward to hearing all of it myself. So excellent. We'll do a twofer. Is that okay, Candace?
That's wonderful. It's been a blast.
It has been a blast. Thank you for listening to the Living After Faith podcast. This podcast is designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We're the official podcast of RecoveringReligionist.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. We welcome your feedback. In fact, we want your feedback. And you can find phone numbers, email addresses, all of that at livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith. Follow us on Twitter at LaughWithMe. The music for this episode is provided by Morrison's Prophecy. See livingafterfaith.com for a link to more music from Morrison's Prophecy.
I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
And I'm Rich Lyons.
Come laugh with me.